All right, everybody. Thank you for attending tonight. I really appreciate your presence on this seminar. My name is Siddhartha Kamasetti, and I'm an owner of Texo Capital. We are a licensed regional center. We're licensed by the USCIS, and I myself am an attorney. I practice corporate transactions, many of those transactions involving real estate. So I have in-depth experience in evaluating real estate deals, negotiating real estate transactions, and specifically I have deep insight into the EB-5 program. As an owner of Texo Capital, I have had the privilege of participating in several EB-5 transactions since the past 6 years. And today, our webinar is intending to educate all of you on how the EB-5 program works. And in addition, we will walk through one of our projects that we're currently working on from an EB-5 perspective, just a brief overview of that project. And we also are lucky enough to have Jennifer Hermansky present today, and she's an immigration attorney from Greenberg Traurig, and she's been practicing in the EB-5 space for several years. I'll allow her to give her introduction a little bit later in the presentation, but she has significant experience in working with nationals from all over the world to help them to file their EB-5 applications and be compliant with the requirements of the EB-5 program. So she'll explain more on that, and specifically for Indian nationals and how, some of the challenges that Indian nationals go through and how they can overcome those challenges. So without further ado, we will now start. Texo Capital is the name of our company, as I just mentioned, and this webinar is covering the route to U.S. immigration through the EB-5 visa program. So just as a little bit of background, the EB-5 program it came into being in 1990 under the Clinton administration, and it has been approved every 3 years since that time as a pilot program. As of current, we are approved through September 30th, 2019, this program. It is administered by the USCIS, which is the U.S. Customs and Immigration Service, and there are 10,000 EB-5 visas that are available worldwide per year. And what that means is each country has a certain allocation of those 10,000 visas. So India, for instance, is allocated 7% of the 10,000 visas. That equates to approximately 700 EB-5 visas are earmarked for Indian nationals each year. And I'll describe the consequence of that and how that works later on, how that impacts EB-5 investors. The policy of the program was to incentivize foreign direct investment. That means investment from those foreign investors that are abroad. And in return, the US government said our policy is to give a green card if people utilize this EB-5 program to invest in the US. So this next slide, this is going over the requirements for an EB-5 visa. So the basic requirements are that the EB-5 visa requires a $500,000 US investment into a project. Now, if that investment creates 10 full-time jobs, then that investor is granted permanent residency in the US, which is a green card, which then leads to citizenship if they so choose, as well as a return of their investment amount. That means that $500,000 comes back to you after you go through the entire immigration process and get your green card. We'll go over this in more detail in later slides, but these are the basic requirements. This piece that's talking about at risk, this is a legal term. One of the requirements of the EB-5 program says that your money needs to have some risk inherent to it when it's going into a project. That means that you can't put your money into a savings account in the US and think that you're going to get a green card. So basically the way that we satisfy this requirement is the money goes to the real estate developer in most instances, or into the project through a loan. A loan is a financial instrument that has some inherent risk in it. Of course, we try and mitigate that risk as much as possible, and that's part of what our company does. But that is how we meet this requirement. So in the next slide, we're talking just about EB-5 in the program in general. So there are two investment amounts that you might have heard of. One is a $500,000 EB-5 investment amount, and the other one is a $1 million EB-5 investment amount. What this means is the US government has said that if your project that you're investing in is located in a TEA, which is a targeted employment area, then you only need to invest $500,000. If the project is located outside one of these TEA regions, then you need to invest $1 million into the project to obtain your green card. A TEA, I'll explain later, but just to give you a brief overview, it basically means that the project is situated in an area that has an unemployment rate that's equal to 150% of the federal unemployment rate. So the government is saying that these projects, we want to incentivize investment into these specific locations that have higher unemployment rates. And to help facilitate that, we will allow investors to invest the lower amount of $500,000. Now, there's two investment mechanisms that you can utilize to obtain an EB-5 green card. One is a direct investment into a business. Typically, that is done through purchasing equity or shares directly in a business of some kind, say a gas station or a restaurant or something of that nature. And the other mechanism is an investment through a regional center sponsored project. That's basically investing into a fund that is managed by a regional center. We'll go over the benefits of working through a regional center in just a few minutes, but just for now, know that there's two routes to performing an EB-5 investment. One is through a direct investment into a business. The other one is through a regional center sponsored fund, investing in one of those. Now, just a general note, the investment funds must be authenticated as a lawful source. This basically means that you need to prove that the money was gained by from lawful means. So you could receive the money as a gift from a relative. You could receive the money as if it was part of your savings, or let's say you're getting a home equity loan on a home that you own. All of these can be done. However, you have to just prove that the source of money is legitimate in each case. And you can do so by showing tax returns, typically 5 years of tax return. If you're using a property, if you're going to sell a piece of property to get your investment amount or a portion of your investment amount, you can show evidentiary proof that you owned title to the property. You can show that the sale documents that you sold the property to come into that money. You can also show bank statements. You can use dividend income that you're making from a company, or use your savings. The savings don't have to be made in the US. They could be savings in India or other places. Jen will go over this in more detail later on in the presentation, but there's a variety of ways that you can demonstrate the lawful source of funds, and there's a variety of sources in which you can draw your money from. Like I said, the gift mechanism is pretty popular in India. Also, what we've noticed is a lot of people own property in India, so you can take a loan out on your Indian property and use those proceeds as part of your EB-5 investment. You can even sell that piece of property in India. There's a variety of mechanisms, and we can go over that a little bit later as well. So in this next slide, we're talking about the advantages of an EB-5 visa. As compared to other visa categories, this is the fastest path to a green card today. And this is compared to the EB2 and EB3 visa programs, for instance, which have 50 to 60-year waits for Indian nationals in those categories. So EB5 right now today is around an 8-year wait to get your green card or your conditional green card. Another difference is that the EB5 visa is self-sponsored. Some of you may be on an H-1B visa that are listening in right now. An H-1B visa is employer-sponsored, as you well know. Here, you're sponsoring yourself by investing your $500,000. So there is no employer sponsorship requirement here. So it leads to more flexibility down later on from a job perspective. There's also high application approval rates. So if you invest in a good project and you work with a quality immigration attorney to put together your EB5 application, typically you see high approval rates for the EB5 program of those applications and to get to the green card. There's also certain benefits for those that do get their green card, that eventually get their green card, such as lower tuition costs. You can qualify as an in-state resident in a lot of instances. You're not a foreign, you're not paying foreign tuition fees, and that's one of the benefits. And this program, unlike other investment programs, has your principal returned to you. So in a successful outcome, again, your money comes back to you. Your $500,000 will come back to you at the end of the loan term, because typically the money is invested through a loan instrument to a real estate development project. And at the end of your immigration process, that loan is paid back and you get your $500,000 back. So we mentioned earlier, there were two mechanisms: a direct investment or a regional center sponsored investment. So this slide is talking more about the regional center and what it is. So a regional center is a company that's licensed by the USCIS to commit ongoing financial and operational commitments, as well as investment administrative activities. So a regional center is basically a company that is administering the EB5 program on behalf of its investors. They do a variety of things, including originate the project deal. They negotiate with the borrower. They look to make sure that the project that the EB5 funds are going to be invested in are compliant with all the program requirements. That is to say that it creates the necessary jobs per each investor, and that there is a there's strong fundamentals for fund repayment, as well as compliance with some of the laws, such as providing a matter of hoe compliant business plan and other elements as well. So regional centers, one of the powerful aspects of them is that they're able to pool the EB5 capital for investment. So that means that several EB5 investors can participate on a regional center sponsored fund, and those funds can be combined and deployed as a loan. So regional centers have that ability to do that. The regional center will act as the manager of the fund and deploy those funds appropriately into the real estate project. They're also allowed to count indirect and induced jobs to satisfy this 10-job requirement from the EB5 program. So I mentioned before that each investor has to create 10 jobs in order to satisfy their EB5 visa requirements. Now, if you're going to do a direct EB5 investment, you can only count something called direct jobs, but regional centers are allowed to count direct, indirect, and induced jobs to satisfy this requirement. I'll explain what those are in just a moment. So here's an example slide of the difference between direct EB5 and regional center EB5. So let's take, for instance, a gas station. So let's say somebody is going to purchase shares in a company that is going to build a gas station through direct EB5. So $500,000 will go into that company and they'll build and operate a gas station. Well, with direct EB5, you have to have some kind of active management role in that company, the gas station company. You also have to create 10 jobs, and they can only be direct jobs. So what that means is if you're constructing the gas station, you can't count any of those construction jobs towards job creation. You would have to count those people that are operating the actual gas station. So the sales attendant, the person operating the cash register, another person who's stocking inventory. Those have to be full-time jobs. And that means that they have 35 hours or more per week. And those jobs need to be sustained for a period of time so that they're not considered temporary jobs. So typically, they shouldn't be less than 2 years, that job. And you need to see that role is consistently open in that company, either filled or that role is there, existent. So these are the requirements from direct EB5. You have to prove that you've created these direct jobs through payroll taxes, W-2 pay stubs, all the employment materials that shows that each of those 10 employees have been employed and those jobs have been sustained for the period of time required. So this is a heavy burden, and this imputes more risk typically to an EB5 investor, an immigration risk point, if you will. That is to say that there's a little bit more risk inherent in satisfying the 10 job creation count as opposed to, say, a regional center type of project. So in a regional center scenario, let's take the gas station, for instance, again. There's an indirect investment through a regional center sponsored fund. So the regional center will originate a fund, and each of the limited partners will be an EB5 investor that is investing $500,000 into that fund by purchasing shares of the fund. Each investor, or the regional center, will then deploy that money as a loan to the owner of the gas station, or the one who's going to build the gas station. So let's call them a real estate developer. So this is a passive investment. There's no active management required for the EB5 investor. That means just merely being an owner of the fund is satisfying their operational requirements from an EB5 perspective. Now, the job creation piece, we are providing a loan to the company that's building the gas station and going to operate it. The 10 jobs can be counted as any combination of direct jobs, indirect jobs, and induced jobs. What this means is, so the direct people that are going to be hired, the cashier and others, can be counted towards one of the jobs. An indirect job means construction. You're going to be constructing this gas station. So you can count the construction workers. Those are indirect jobs that are being created as a result of investing your money. And there's several more jobs there through indirect. There might be an architect or an engineer who is going to be utilized for that project as well for the construction. Those are indirect jobs. There are induced jobs. So induced jobs may be even more tenuous, such as some worker who has to drive the gas to the gas station, a truck driver, for instance. So there's an economic impact that's created from your EB5 investment to create direct, indirect, and induced jobs. As a result, the government they accept an economic report that's tailored to the project as evidence of job creation. So, I'm sorry, not as evidence of job creation, but to illustrate the number of jobs that will be created from the project. This is a very important distinction. This basically means that instead of these W-2 pay stubs and these employment contracts and tax returns to prove job creation, we can show that as per an economic report, that means the developer spent the money, the EB5 money, in a way that they said they would spend it. So that is for construction, for architecture, for hiring the actual direct jobs. All of those things are captured in the economic report. So here's an example of an economic report. This is just an illustration to help you understand the concept. So for a regional center sponsored project, let's say that you're building a hotel, and this hotel has a budget that's going to cost $10 million for construction, $1 million for architecture fees, and the hotel, once it's stabilized, will generate $20 million of revenue totally. So this is the budget, and this is also the pro forma for revenues. So the RIMS2 is an economic, it's basically an economic model that the USCIS accepts. And what that says is there's job creation multipliers. So for instance, every $1 million in construction you spend, there's 15 jobs, a 15 multiplier ascribed to that $1 million. So $10 million of construction cost would create 150 jobs, 15 jobs per million. $1 million spent on architect and engineering may create 8 jobs if the multiplier is 8. So 8 times 1 is 8 again. And revenues also can create jobs. Here, there's 200 jobs created. If there's a 10, the multiplier is 10. So in total, there's 358 jobs created from this project as per the economic report. So the regional center will look to see that the project has a good job estimating their numbers. Let's say that the project says that they're going to spend 10 million, but they only spend 9 million. If that's the case, then only 135 jobs will be created, 15 times 9. So a regional center such as ours like to create job cushions for our investors. That means let's create more than 10 jobs per each investor in case there's some variance in what the projections were. So let's create 14 to 20 jobs per investor. This is how we underwrite our deals to add more safety and mitigate risk for the investors. Also, even though that hotel revenues can procure jobs, regional centers such as ours do not want to depend on those jobs to satisfy the job creation count. So even though this project can support maybe 35 investors, that's 10 jobs per investor, 35 would be 350, we would take 15 investors. We want all the job creation to be done for our investors after construction period, once you reach the certificate of occupancy. And the reason we do that is because we don't want to depend on all these other expenditures, all these other revenues to satisfy the job creation count. We want our investors to know once the certificate of occupancy is issued, their green card requirements have been satisfied. That's important to us, and that's important to our investor. Oftentimes, you can also have the developer get certain assurances, such as completion guarantees, to ensure that your construction period is going to be complete and the certificate of occupancy will be there. You also have other protections, such as a senior lender, a notable senior lender that underwrites a deal heavily to also make sure there's mechanisms to make sure that you get to that finished, stabilized hotel or whatever project it may be that has more value and that creates the necessary jobs. This is an example of a TEA that I mentioned earlier. So a TEA, again, is a targeted employment area. So here, for instance, let's say we're doing a project located in this orange area, in this purple area in Cleveland, Ohio. Well, we could draw a map that combines several census tracts, and those census tracts, if they equal 150% of the national unemployment rate, and that's accepted by a state agency, then it's going to be considered a TEA. So we can pre-qualify a project beforehand, before we even start doing any other diligence, to make sure that it falls within a TEA. These TEA requirements will be more difficult after November 21st. We'll go over that, and Jen can also shed some light on that, but we're not going to be able to, long story short, we're not going to be able to combine as many census tracts as previously to get to a TEA qualified project. It'll be more difficult. And TEAs will not be state administered anymore. They'll be federally administered. The Department of Homeland Security will approve and disapprove of whether a project is a TEA come November 21st. These are important changes that may make it more difficult for EB5 investors. This is the program mechanism. So this is just going through some steps to identify some of the major program process pieces. So the first, the USCIS will issue a designation or a license to a regional center. Then the foreign investor will invest $500,000 into a regional center sponsored fund. This is an Indian national in our case. The regional center sponsored fund will then loan the money to the real estate developer. Then the government will provide conditional residency to the foreign investor. This is called a conditional residency or conditional green card. It's the same thing as a green card. It just means that the conditions are that you have to create the 10 jobs or evidence that you created the 10 jobs after a 2-year period of holding that green card, that conditional green card. Once you submit this job creation and the proof that you created the 10 jobs, that condition drops off your green card and it's just a green card at that point. It's just a permanent residency. So while you can come and be a green card holder here at step 4, your green card is permanent, is indefinitely in place now once the job creation part has been satisfied and approved by the government. At that point, the loan is repaid to the foreign investor. Here's an investor step-by-step process. First, you need to understand whether you want to do the EB-5 program. If you choose to do so, then you're going to select a project and you're going to subscribe to a fund, a regional centers fund, by signing the subscription documents for that fund. That basically means you're going to purchase the units or shares in that fund. Then once you sign those documents, you're going to make a qualifying investment of $500,000 into the fund. Along with these subscription documents, you'll also review a private purchase memorandum that is an overview of the risks of the project and other details of the project. And then you'll make your qualifying investment. You will then file something called an I-526 petition. And this is basically your EB-5 application. It's going to show all sorts of background information about yourself, but the main component is your source of fund, your lawful source of fund proof. That'll be in this petition. They also need to see that you've already invested your money so that your money is technically at risk as per the requirements in this petition. And the regional center will give you the evidence that you invested that money to actually attach to your application. The investor and their family members will all receive a conditional green card. And then the investor is going to file an I-829 petition. This is your proof that you've created the jobs. So the regional center will give that evidence, will work with you and the immigration attorney so that you can file this I-829 petition and remove the conditions on your green card. Now you will only have a green card at that point without conditions on it. This timeline pulls everything together. So basically, as we said earlier, you're going to make your investment here, and then you're going to file your I-526 petition. These numbers at the bottom, these times, are pulled right from the USCIS website, but these times are variable. They depend on how staffed the USCIS is, how many applications are there. Jen can give you probably a better realistic time frame that she's seeing right now for EB-5 application processing. Right now, the website lists 27.5 months or so. It can be about 2 years right now, from my understanding, for I-526 application approval. And then you're going to file something. If you're an H-1B visa holder, you'll file an I-485, which adjusts your status in the US. If you're in India, then you're going to go to, you're going to do consular processing in Mumbai. So you'll have to sit for an interview in the US consulate that's located in Mumbai. This process can take, it's saying 10 to 14 months on the USCIS website, but this can happen much quicker. Then you're given your conditional green card. At this point, after your status is adjusted or you have sat for your interview in Mumbai, you have to hold this green card for 24 months. Now, 60 to 90 days before your 2 years are finished for your conditional green card, that is the time that you file your I-829 application. This is the application where you submit proof that you created the jobs. This application, again, has a 29 to 49 month time period that the USCIS is listing right now on their website. And this is the total immigration timeline. Now above, this is the India cutoff date. So I mentioned on the first slide that India has 700 out of the 10,000 visas per year. Since India has now been determined in July of this year. It was determined that India has more EB-5 applications that are pending than there are available visa slots this year. It's in what is called retrogression. That means that now there's a wait time here until you can actually have your interview and get your conditional green card. So right now, while it might take 2 years to get your I-526 approved, Indians are seeing a 6-year wait during this period of time just because they need the visa available for them, one of that quota for that specific year, before they can have that interview. So if you apply today, they're saying it's approximately from the beginning of filing your I-526 to getting your conditional green card around 8 years. So this is still the fastest mechanism to getting a green card today. But that's the impact of this visa retrogression for India. That just means that many Indians have been using it. Now below, we have a project timeline. This project timeline is showing what's happening to the real estate project that your money is invested in. So once you file your I-526 petition, your money is now going to be invested into a real estate project as a loan. During the first 2 years of the real estate project, you are seeing the construction happen for that project. And then after the 2 years of construction, then the project is being operated. So if it's a hotel, you're seeing operation of the hotel and people are staying in the rooms and it's operating. Then at some point, could happen year 4, year 10, a refinancing of the project or a sale of the project could occur. And that's typically where the money is returned to the investors from a refinancing or a sale event. Now, if you remember earlier, I was telling you about regional centers. So remember the budget. If your jobs are only tied to the construction period, that is the required jobs you have are only tied to hard costs, you'll know right here after construction is done and certificate of occupancy is granted that you have created all the jobs necessary. So while you might know that you have your green card secured here, you have to wait all of this time until you can actually get your conditional green card. So that's just something to keep in mind. In a regional center such as ours, that's how we underwrite our deals so that our investors can have that sense of security. Oh, one more point here. During this entire process, the money needs to be outstanding in the loan instrument. It needs to be at risk during this entire immigration process. So that is part of the program. So you have to expect your money to be outstanding for around a 10-year period of time. While it takes you 8 years to get your conditional green card, your money may be outstanding for 10 years in the loan instrument. Now you're getting paid an interest rate as well, and the green card is a return as well on that. But that's the period of time you have to think when you're making this investment. So why our company? So we are comprised of several partners. We have operators. So one of our director of operations has close to a decade of experience actually operating regional centers, working with investors. She participated in projects of $200 million of EB-5 investment. We also know real estate very well. So we have real estate developers that are part of our company as well. They have over 40 years of real estate developer experience. We have a multilingual team that speaks languages such as Russian. We have strong local and regional government support. So the real estate developers that we work with, they have lots of government support. They know several local and federal level people. We also have a seasoned operational team. So I was mentioning those years of experience with our operational person. We have attorneys such as myself, and we understand real estate finance and structured finance as well. We have partners overseas that we work with. For instance, if you're an Indian national, we know several Indian banks that could help you if you'd like to utilize a piece of property to obtain your EB-5 investment amount. You can collateralize it. We can make those introductions for you. We know the numbers. We understand the Reserve Bank's limitations and those roles and how to work those processes. So all of this experience we have in-house. We also choose low-risk projects with defined exit strategies. So I was referencing some of our underwriting criteria earlier on, creating more jobs per investor, really tying our job creation to the hard costs so that we know that we can get through the construction period and everybody will have a green card at that point, or satisfied the requirements, that is, the job creation requirements. We have team members that have personally immigrated to the US. We use independent third parties to evaluate our deals, such as HVS for hotels or Jones Lang LaSalle. We like to get market studies, feasibility studies, really look at these real estate projects thoroughly. And we have access to underwriting teams as well as ourselves with our real estate developer partners. So all of those reasons are why our company we feel are very strong and are the right choice for many of you investors. We also provide regular project updates as well. So you can call us, you can email us, we'll tell you where the project is, we'll tell you what's happening, we'll give you annual updates, all of those things. We really pride ourselves on being transparent and accessible. So here's something that I mentioned earlier. This is, oops, I apologize. This is what has happened. There's some recent updates to the EB-5 program. So basically, on July 24th, there were new rules that were finalized. This is the first time that the Department of Homeland Security has implemented new rules to the EB-5 program since 1990. These rule changes are now such that an investment into a project that is qualified as a targeted employment area will be $900,000, not $500,000. So that's an increase of $400,000. If it's a non-TEA project, then it'll be $1.8 million to get an EB-5 visa. So these rules go into effect November 21st. Until that time, it's still $500,000 to invest, and $1 million if it's a non-TEA project. All of our projects are TEA projects. They're also going to change the way that they calculate TEAs. First, the federal government is going to issue TEA designations. That's the Department of Homeland Security, and as opposed to the state governments that used to be giving them out. And now you can only count the actual project census tract as well as those census tracts touching that project to count your TEA or the unemployment rate that qualifies the project for a TEA. So that's going to make it much more difficult, and there'll be different projects basically that'll be qualifying for TEAs after this. So all I-526 petitions, though, EB-5 applications that are filed before November 21st will be grandfathered into this lower investment amount of $500,000. And those projects will still be following the requirements, the old EB-5 requirements. So TEAs will be state designated and those things. After November 21st, all of that will change. The other update is that India is retrogressed now, meaning that there is a priority date of 2014 that has been implemented. So it's around now an 8-year wait to get your EB-5 green card if you apply today as an Indian national. So that's something to be aware of. We can go into more details on that if you want to personally talk about that. You can feel free to call or contact one of us. Jen will go over some of this as well, and you can hear it from her too. Here's my contact information. I do appreciate you listening to the educational portion of the webinar. We're now going to go into one of our projects, but you can contact me at this email address, scamasetti@texoeb5.com, as well as my mobile phone number of 614-403-4124. Feel free to ping me or to email me. So the current project that we have right now is located in Amherst, Ohio, and it's called the Cascade Cliffs. This project was basically an old sandstone quarry. A quarry basically is where they were extracting these sandstone blocks to help create buildings or construct buildings back in the early 1900s. What was left behind was this pristine, beautiful forest development with open cavities filled with natural water. Those are the quarries. So this project is situated on this site, And it's going to be a hotel, spa. It's going to have residential lots as well as townhomes. There's going to be a camping theme, or a glamping theme, if you will, glamorous camping. And it's really a spa and resort, a very upscale one, in Ohio. This is located in Ohio, just outside of Cleveland. So these are some renderings of what what the facility is going to look like. They're going to have all sorts of fun recreational activities for people. There's going to be, this camping. There's going to be picturesque waterfalls. There's going to be spa facilities. They're building an equestrian facility for horseback riding, and a variety of trails and other things will be created as well, fishing and biking. This is what the total project will look like. As you can see, there's an entry gate, a spa, all the things I was listing earlier, fly fishing, pool house. They'll be creating a beach. There's residential properties that are going to be situated within the facilities as well, within the grounds. The developer that is building this has a long track record of using EB-5 dollars. So it's a very strong developer that we like, and this is a snapshot of their track record. They've been using EB-5 funds for building projects since 2008, when they did McClellan Air Force Base, which was an Air Force base in California that was redeveloped into an industrial commercial park, mixed-use park. And as you can see, all the I-526 associated with those projects are 100% approved. They've utilized over $400 million since then, including over $150 million on the Football Hall of Fame in the past few years in Canton, Ohio. But as you can see, they're one of the few developers in the country that have actually have a track record of repaying the EB-5 dollars, which is another thing that we really liked in this from these project developers. Their IA-29s from those that are not pending are all 100% approved as well, the job creation portion of the application. So there's a lot of strong fundamentals with this developer. Here's some previous projects that they built. They built this McClellan Air Force Base. They had 276 EB-5 investors on that. In Downey, California, they did a film studio and they had 91 investors, 208 investors for the Goodyear World Headquarters. They purchased the World Headquarters from Goodyear and they leased it back. Here's some pictures of the Hall of Fame project that is being built currently right now in Akron, Ohio. This is a Hilton Curio hotel. It's a football themed hotel that they've used EB-5 funds to help construct. Here's the total project of that. There's a stadium, there's a hotel, there's a research park. This is also, the NFL is also a participant on this project. Here's the owner of the development firm, and here's Donald Trump congratulating him, as well as the CEO or the president of the Football Hall of Fame. And here's a write-up on him. He has a lot of press. They own over 150 properties in 28 states. This number is higher now, but over 100 million square feet of real estate throughout the U.S. And on their Hall of Fame deal, they had a $360 million bank line of credit on that deal. So, they have a track record of developing their serial real estate developers. That is their profession. They know how to work with EB-5. It's a high quality group. And here are some of their big tenants that they have in some of their properties throughout the U.S. Ford, Pfizer, Goodyear, GM. Here are some other tenants that they have, Coca-Cola, Land O'Lakes. So they're a serious, almost institutional grade developer. And here's what phase one of this project will look like. It's just this portion. Other phases of the project will be built subsequently, but it'll have a pub, it'll have a hotel with 55 rooms. They're building 94 residential lots, which will be developed by another developer, but they're going to be selling the lots to those developers. Condos, they have 10 of those that they're building, as well as a clubhouse. So Amherst is right outside of Cleveland, around 45 minutes from there, but the project is situated in a close proximity to several cities, several major cities such as Pittsburgh, Cleveland, Columbus, and Detroit. Here are some more renderings of the project. Here is our regional center license, our company Texo Capitals, and this is the end of that. So now I'm going to pass on the presentation to Jen. Jen, I'm going to unmute you. Hi, Jen. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
I can. Yes.
Okay, great.
Okay. I was planning on passing the screen to you. Is that okay, or would you like me to?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, great. Here we go. Great. Jen, I think you're all set. Um, so you can go ahead.
I only see your screen, however.
Okay, let me see. I
Hold on one
apologize.
second.
You know what I'll do, Jen? I might just do it from mine if that's okay.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, apologize. I have yours right here. Just to make it quick. Okay, you can start at any point.
Okay, sure. You can go to the next slide. It's fine.
Okay, great.
Okay, hello everyone. As Sid previously explained, my name is Jen Hermansky. I'm a shareholder at Greenberg Traurig. We're a large multinational law firm. We have more than 2,000 lawyers across the world, and we have more than 39 offices. And I personally work on EB5 cases. It is what I spend almost the majority of my time doing. We at GT have worked on more than 3,500 EB5 petitions for people who have gone through this process with their family, who are very experienced in doing this. So I'm happy to go through this process with you today. So you already heard from Sid a lot about what the EB5 program is. I'll just review again some of the different steps in the process, and I will also review what the source of funds requirements are. And then we will also look into the various immigration requirements and what is happening recently on EB5, because the government has some new rules coming out. So we can go to the next slide. So Sid explained that every year we have 10,000 green cards available for EB5, and we split up those 10,000 green cards not by country of citizenship, but by country of birth. So not one country cannot have more than 7% of all of these visas. So that's why Sid was mentioning before that there are about 700 green cards that can be given out annually to people who were born in India. We'll talk a little bit more about that later, but the minimum investment is generally $500,000, as was previously explained, if it's in a TEA. And then the investment has to create at least 10 full-time jobs for US workers. The green card that you receive is first valid for 2 years. And at the end of the 2 years, we file another application to have those conditions removed on the green card, and we show that the jobs were in fact created and that you've sustained your investment throughout the immigration process. So we can go to the next. So there's many benefits to the EB5 program, but I like to list them here. It is a green card program, so you live indefinitely in the United States once you get the green card. It's not temporary in nature, even though there is a temporary green card component. It is permanent residence in the US. It's one of the very few types of petitions that we have that are self-sponsored, meaning you don't need an employer in the United States to sponsor you, nor do you need a family member who is a US citizen or permanent resident to sponsor you. So it's a very good option if you don't want to rely on a family member or you don't have a family member who could qualify to sponsor you. And it's also good if you don't want to rely upon or don't have an employer in the United States to sponsor you for a green card. It's also generally for people born in India. EB5 will be much quicker than other backlog categories that are employment-based sponsorship like the EB-5. So also the derivative applicants get a green card. They also get permanent residence. So you can bring your spouse and you can bring unmarried children who are under the age of 21, generally at the time of the I-526 petition filing, although we can talk a little bit later about, what that means for older children. But the investor, based on the $500,000 investment, does have the right to bring their spouse and their children to the United States with them. We can move forward. So EB-5 is a multi-step immigration process, as Sid was explaining. Once you've chosen a project and made the investment, we file the Form I-526 with U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services. We also call that USCIS. That's the administrative agency that is charged with all of the immigration applications. Right now, the processing time on that application is greater than 24 months, I would say. Sometimes we see something get approved a little bit quicker, but I would say 24 to 27 months is the standard processing time right now. In the I-526 petition, we're showing the Immigration Service that you've made a qualifying investment into a project that will create 10 jobs in the future. And also we're showing that the source of your $500,000 came from some lawful source, either in the United States or abroad. Once that is approved and any visa backlog period has passed, then you process for the 2-year green card. If you are abroad in India, then you process for the immigrant visa at the U.S. consulate abroad where you're living. If you're here in the United States and you're maintaining some sort of non-immigrant status in the United States, such as H-1B or L-1, then you're eligible to apply for the 2-year green card in the United States. That's the I-485 process that Sid discussed earlier. That's approximately a 12-month process to get the 2-year green card. It is an application process in India, or it's an application process here in the United States, and it does take some time. But once that is granted to you, you get a 2-year green card. And many investors ask me, what's the difference between the 2-year green card and the permanent green card? What are the different rights and responsibilities that I have? And I answer that question by saying none. There's no difference between the 2-year and 10-year card in terms of your rights. The only difference is the length of the time given to you on the card. So the 2-year green card is first issued to you because we have to come back and show to the Immigration Service that the jobs were actually created by the project. And then once that is shown to the Immigration Service, then you get a full 10-year green card. But while you're here on the 2-year green card and the 10-year green card, you have work authorization in the United States. You can work anywhere you want. You can go to school. You can not work at all. You have the right to live here indefinitely. So you could start your own business if you wanted. There's a lot of different options that you have when you're here on the 2-year green card. And then again, like we've been mentioning, the third step in the process is to file the Form I-829 with USCIS at the end of the 2-year green card to show that the project created the jobs and that you kept your investment money in the project. Now, once that's over, you are sort of exited from the EB-5 process. You can be repaid by the project, assuming everything went well with the project itself. And you're also potentially coming close to the time where you'd be eligible to naturalize to a U.S. citizen if you'd like. So it does create a path all the way to citizenship through the naturalization process. You're eligible for naturalization after you've been a permanent resident for 5 years. And the time that you spend on the 2-year green card counts towards the total 5 years. So many times, once the I-829 is approved, then it's time for the investor to really move on to the naturalization process, assuming they would like to do that. Okay, let's move to the next slide. So I just wanted to explain a little bit. I know that Sid already explained how this EB5 transaction works in the regional center context, but I find it helpful to have, another summary of it. Essentially, all of the investors like yourself, you're pooling your funds together, you're making equity contributions into a fund, and that fund will have shareholders just like you, and the fund will pool the money together and generally make a loan or make a preferred equity investment into a project. So once the loan is made to the project, the loan is outstanding there, assuming everything goes well, the project is built, the project creates all of the jobs for the benefits of the investors in the EB5 fund there. Eventually, the loan will mature and be repaid to the EB5 fund, and then the EB5 fund distributes back out the money to its shareholders, which are all the investors like you. So that is, in general, how EB5 works. The fund itself, it's not exactly like a mutual fund because, of course, these are special purpose entities. So the risk here is not diversified, right? The EB5 investment fund is making one loan into a project. There's not many different investments, there's just one loan. So that project needs to be successful in order for your capital to be returned and for the jobs to be created. So I saw there was a question to the panelists. Can we explain more about the loan instrument and how risky is it? Every project is different. You want to review all of the things that are given to you in the project materials about the projects and the risks involved. And you will see a description of the loan for the project itself. So in general, eventually that loan will mature, and then assuming the project is a success and the funds are repaid to the EB5 fund, that's how the investors get exited after they're through their EB5 immigration process. Okay, we can go to the next slide. So a big part of the EB5 petition, and that's at step one, the I-526 petition, is we are showing that you have invested a lawful source of funds. So obviously our US government has an interest in making sure that the funds being invested in the United States projects are lawful funds and they're not laundered into the US. The Immigration Service says we can really use any lawful source of funds. You can use business earnings, distributions from your companies, salary from where you work, or gifts from other individuals. You can take a loan out against your house, things like that. But we have to show what that source is, and then we have to trace the money from you into the project in the United States. Okay, we can go to the next slide. So it's our burden to pinpoint the exact source of the $500,000 investment and to the USCIS. And we also have to show the source of any administrative fee that you pay. Generally, they do want to see at least 5 years of income tax returns. And if the source of the funds is coming from India, the United States Citizenship and Immigration Services sees many different cases from all over the world, but they've certainly seen many cases from India. And the USCIS knows that, investors from India generally have westernized financial records. You pay personal income tax and business taxes, and your tax regime is westernized. And so USCIS is pretty used to seeing those documents, and they'll know what to ask for. So we're always pinpointing that exact source of the $500,000. It is not our objective to prove the investor's overall net worth to the Immigration Service. If you happen to be worth $100 million, that's great for you, but we don't have to prove that you're worth $100 million. We just have to show where this $500,000 came from. Okay, next slide. So here are some samples of the types of source of funds that we see. There are a lot of investors that have salary over time. They might be executives here in the United States or in India, and we would show their tax returns, letters from their employers, and bank statements showing recent payments being made and showing their savings over time. It's also quite common for people to sell a piece of property to do EB-5. In that case, we would have to document both the purchase of the property and then the subsequent sale of it. And we have to show, sort of your basis in the property, when and how you acquired the property, and then also when and how you disposed of that property, and then show the full trace of that fund. The most popular thing we see investors do is take out a loan from a bank. And the rule is that if you use money from a bank to do EB-5, that's fine. The loan must be secured by your personal assets generally. And so many people secure a loan with their residence, and we get an appraisal of how much that residence is worth, and we have to show that the loan is fully secured and that you own that collateral. But that's quite common for people that don't want to liquidate an asset in order to do EB-5. The other thing that we see people doing is taking out a distribution or a payment from a company that they own. Particularly in India, we see many people are entrepreneurial in nature, and so we see money coming out as company distributions from companies that they own, and that'll be our burden to show what your company does and how it earns money and what its financials are in order to make distributions to its shareholders. Okay, we can go to the next slide. So it's also very common for investors to receive a gift from the lawful source of funds. And what we see generally is sometimes a parent gifting money to a child to do EB-5, or some other family member gifting money to someone to do EB-5. That's fine. We always need to document the gift is made, and then the burden transfers onto the person that's giving the gift to show how the money came about, right? So the lawful source of funds shifts onto the person giving the gift, and then that person has to open up their financials and show how they have the $500,000 to give the gift. So that's quite common. We see it most frequently with a parent who has a child that is close to turning 21, or maybe has already turned over the age of 21, and the parent wants the child to immigrate to the United States on EB-5. But the parent doesn't necessarily want to immigrate, right? So they give the money to the child in order to do it, and then we just work with the parent to show their source of funds. Okay, next slide. So we also have to show the full path of the funds to the United States. So, what we need to do there is trace from the investor's bank account into the bank account of the investment in the United States. And if money is coming from abroad, particularly if money is coming from India, we need to show all of the transactions for how that money came here. And right now, of course, there is a restriction on currency in India. You can't transfer out a full $500,000 from one bank account during 1 year for one person. So there might be multiple transactions that need to happen in order for the full amount of the funds to make their way to the United States, and all of those transactions need to be documented. All that being said, it's just important to work with an immigration attorney that you feel comfortable with, but also that has done these types of applications before. So they know what the immigration service is going to ask for, what is going to be required in the application, and then that makes the process go a little bit faster and a little bit easier at the end. So we can go forward. So one thing I want to note is that many of you might be here in the US, you might be very familiar with the immigration laws, and you're interested in doing EB-5 as an alternative to having your employer sponsor you for a green card in the United States due to various wait times that are occurring for people born in India. So if you are here in the United States and the lawful source of your funds actually comes from income that's earned in the United States, then we have the burden to show that you had work authorization from the United States Citizenship and Immigration Services, and we want to show your tax returns here in the US and get letters from your employers and have all your banking records to show when and how you've been saving money. So it is totally fine to have a source of funds coming from the United States. It's quite common. In that case, again, it's just our burden to show that you're working lawfully here in the United States, because the Immigration Service takes the position that if you've had income earned in the US and you are not in lawful status, then that is not lawfully sourced funds. Okay, so we can keep moving forward. So we mentioned before that the green card is valid for only 2 years. It is quite like if you are getting married to a United States citizen and they are sponsoring you, we also give those people 2-year green cards. And at the end of the 2 years, they have to come back and show they're still married. Here, it's very similar. We are getting a 2-year green card, and then we have to come back 2 years later, and we have to show that the project actually happened and the project used our money and we kept our money invested. And also we have to show that the jobs were created. So that is what we are doing in the I-829 petition. Before the 2-year green card expires, we're filing this 3rd application to get you the full permanent green card. And generally you'll be continuing to work with your lawyer during this process, and you'll also be working with the project. And it's really on the project and the regional center to prepare all of the documents that will be required by the Immigration Service for this part of the process. And so we will help gather up the materials from the project and from the regional center to make this happen. And then we file this application with the USCIS. Next slide. Once that application is approved, the investor and the family, they receive 10-year green cards again. So just so we're clear here, the green card that you are given, your residence here in the United States is permanent. It doesn't expire at the end of the 10 years, just the card expires, because obviously we look different over time. So every 10 years you need to get a new card, but it's no longer attached to the EB-5 process. And again, as I mentioned, you can be eligible to naturalize after 5 years of permanent residence, which includes the 2 years of the conditional green card. Okay, next slide. So I wanted to spend a few minutes talking about the recent EB-5 news. There's a lot happening for people who were born in India and also generally in EB-5. So the biggest news in EB-5, as you will see if you've been reading the news about EB-5, is that the government has published new regulations in final. These are going to be new laws that are prescribed for the EB-5 program. The biggest change affecting investors is that we have increased the minimum investment amount from $500,000 to $900,000 for TEA projects, so areas that are in a rural area or a high unemployment area. And the minimum investment amount went from $1 million to $1.8 million for all other projects that are not in TEAs. This adjusted the inflation between 1991 and 2015. So we've adjusted it for a significant amount of inflation that's happening. And the effective date of these new rules is going to be November 21st, 2019. So besides the minimum investment amount changing, they've also made it more difficult, as Sid was explaining, for projects to be in a targeted employment area. So many more projects are going to be located in areas where there's a $1.8 million minimum investment amount. So that is a significant price increase from the $500,000. So keep that in mind. The government has made a very clear rule that any application that is properly filed and received at the Immigration Service before or on November 20th, so the day before the effective date. Everyone filed on or before November 20th will be judged under the standards that are in place now. So that's the $500,000 investment with the current DEA rules. Anyone that has an application filed and is received at the Immigration Service on or after November 21, which is the effective date, you will be subject to these new rules. So the heightened rules, the $900,000 or the $1.8 million investment amount, and the new TEA rules. So you don't need to have your application approved by November. That would not be possible because the current processing time is more than 2 years. You don't need to have your application approved by November. You just need to have it filed by November. I will, caution everyone, it's not a good idea to wait around until the last minute to file because your application does need to be flawless and not have any mistakes in it and have it properly received by November 20th in order for it to be under these new rules. So the Immigration Service has been trying for a very long time to change the rules. The U.S. Congress has tried to change the rules a number of times about EB-5, but they haven't been so effective in passing the laws. And so the Immigration Service has been going through a process for many years to try and change these rules. And so these were just published last week in final. So these are definitely happening. It's no longer some sort of speculation about when will the government change the investment amount. This is actually happening. And now you all know the date to, that the government has put forth that you need to file by, right? So that's November 20th because it becomes effective on November 21st. The other thing going on is that we need a USCIS EB-5 extension by September 30th. So the Regional Center EB-5 program remains a temporary program that needs to be reauthorized by our U.S. Congress. It currently expires on September 30th of this year, and we need another extension by our U.S. Congress beyond then to keep the program going. Probably that's likely. We've always gotten extensions since 1992, so I wouldn't imagine that we wouldn't, continue to get them. I'm sure we're going to continue to get them. But again, you also have to keep in mind the effective date of November 21 for the other new rules that are happening. And then finally, the other thing that is happening here is that for people born in India, okay, you are now subject to a visa backlog for EB-5 purposes. So again, as we were explaining a few times during this webinar, we limit the amount of green cards that we give out every year to 10,000. And then, so no one country takes advantage of all of the green cards, leaving none for the rest of the world. We limit by country of birth, not country of citizenship, by country of birth, the number of green cards that we give out. So right now, for people born in India, there are more people subscribing and getting green cards every year than there are green cards available, right? So if there's only 700 available, we have more than 700 applicants now from India each year. And so the State Department began limiting those green cards to people born in India. Back in April or May, the State Department made a prediction that for people filing EB-5 petitions today, around now, this time, the wait time between the time you file the I-526 petition, that's step one, and the time you can have the 2-year green card issued to you is approximately 8 years. Now, that time does not take into consideration people that will drop out of the process along the way or be denied along the way. So it might not be 8 years, but generally a few months ago, the State Department said that that was the best estimate that they could give to people born in India. So right now we're only limiting EB-5 green cards to people from high demand countries. They are currently India, mainland China, Vietnam, and So those countries are now backlogged in the EB5 category. However, it is quite common for us to have EB5 investors who are born in India still approaching us because the wait time for EB2 is extremely protracted. During the same conference where the State Department said that it could be 8 years to wait for EB5, the State Department also said someone filing now under the EB2 category with their employer might wait more than 60 years. So it's still a faster route than the other employment-based categories if you're born in India. So it's important to always consult with an immigration attorney about that, about how long you might wait and what your plans are in the meantime, because the filing of the EB5 petition does not grant you any status in the United States. You need to, separately qualify for non-immigrant status in the United States in order for you to wait that time period in the United States. So just keep that in mind. That's important to plan with your immigration attorney, and also plan who the EB5 investor should be. So because of this wait of 8 years, if you have a child that, is really over the age of 14 years old, and really the objective of the parents is to have the child eventually immigrate to the United States, it probably makes sense to have the child be the investor and leave the parents out of the process except for the source of funds. And that's possible. You can plan that with your immigration attorney, and they can explain how that process works. But it's possible for a parent to sort of hold the investment as the custodian of the child, and the child gets to become the investor and take advantage of the immigration benefits that come from the EB5. So again, plan that with your lawyer. And I encourage you, if you think EB5 is something that is interesting to you, reach out to an immigration lawyer to start planning for it, because this is not the type of application that comes together in one day, right? There's a period of time of preparing for these applications, and you don't want to wait until November to decide you want to move forward, because it does take time to prepare and put these applications together, and also to do due diligence and select a project. And that's something that you'll be going through as well. And with that, Sid, I guess I'll turn it back over to you, because I think this presentation is done for me.
Jen, you were great. Thank you so much for attending and providing all that useful information. I want to say a couple things, and Jen, if you don't mind sticking around just for a minute, because there's a couple questions too that some of the audience members had. I think your insight will be great to help answer some of those. But one thing that I didn't mention earlier on is that we have an I-526 money back guarantee. So that means that if your I-526 or your EB5 application is rejected through no fault of your own, that means there was nothing fraudulent, you didn't lie in your application, those things, we will provide you that $500,000 back to you. Now, with that, we do prefer that you work with a high-quality immigration attorney, because we want to know that the I-526 applications are put together properly by somebody who's worked with several Indian investors and worked with the entire process, all the way from I-526 to I-829. And I do encourage you, whoever you do choose, to ask your immigration attorney those type of questions. Also, the experience level of the immigration attorney can help you in that you have a lower risk of getting RFEs if you work with somebody that knows what they're doing. So from our perspective, we do provide that money back guarantee if your I-526 is rejected, but we do prefer you work with a top immigration attorney that's been working in this space for several years. And you should ask your attorneys how long they've been working in this space, whoever it is that you do choose. So with that, we had a couple questions that were asked that I think might be beneficial for everybody to hear the response to. So, so one of the questions was, let me see. So what happened? So basically, one of the tenets of EB5 is that you and your spouse and any child under the age of 21 all get the green card under the primary applicant's application. So you all file, but all your family members under that $500,000 investment will get the green card. So one of the questions was, what happens if my son crosses the age of 21 years during the period of time before you get your conditional green card? And that's a good question. Jen, since you're on the line, I would always answer this one, but since you're on the line, it's great to hear it from the mouth of an immigration attorney. Do you mind taking that one?
Sure.
Thank you.
So this is very complicated, and again, I want to encourage you to work with your attorney to plan for this, because there are laws in place that will actually freeze your child's age while the I-526 petition is pending. But it does not freeze the child's age during any period of backlog. So let's take a quick example. If the backlog is 7 years, it ends up being 7 years in between the time you file and the time that you can get the 2-year green card. And your I-526 petition was pending for 2 years. Your child has, waited around for 7 years, right? So now they're older, right? So we look at their age. Maybe they've crossed over 21. We get to subtract the amount of time that your child's application was pending at USCIS. So the I-526 was pending, right? So that was 2 years. So we get to subtract the 2 years from their age. But if they're still over 21, then it's possible that they are not going to be immigrating with you. And so it becomes complicated for people who were born in countries that have a backlog like India. So you really have to plan with your immigration lawyer and decide what the true priorities are for the family. Many times when I speak to the family, the parents don't even want to really immigrate to the US. It's really, they want the child to be able to go and attend school in the United States, so they do it for the child. And in that case, if the child is already 16 years old, probably it's going to be my recommendation for the child to do their own EB-5, so there's no risk of the child aging out and no longer being able to accompany the parent to the United States. So again, plan with your lawyer, because it's really important to understand that when you're making such a large investment, you need to make sure that your goals are going to be achieved for your family.
Thanks, Jen. That was a great explanation. Yeah, so you should work with your immigration attorney. They might be able to help you understand a threshold age that your child should be before, if you're going to plan for them to be a derivative applicant, from your primary application, EB-5 application. We also received a quick question, and this will be the last question, about can we borrow the money from friends apart from relatives? So it has to do basically with borrowing some of the proceeds for your EB-5 investment. Jen, I'll also give this one to you, if you will, in 1 minute while I unmute you.
Yeah, it's okay. I can unmute myself.
Okay, great.
So the question is, can you borrow money from relatives? The answer is you can. It needs to be an actual loan that's documented by some contract that is in writing. And that loan, again, needs to be secured by what the investor owns. So maybe a house or something like that, because loans still need to be fully secured under the current USCIS rules. And in a situation where you get money from a bank, generally we're focused on, the collateral that you put up for the loan and how you acquired that collateral. If you get a loan from a family member, someone that's related to you, there's usually one further inquiry by the Immigration Service, and that is, how did your family member have the money to give to you, because you know, you getting money from grandma is different than you getting a loan, you know, from a large bank. So they generally peel back a little bit further and ask you to prove how your relative was able to give you the money. So in that sort of situation, you're sort of doing double work, because you know you're documenting how you have the collateral for the loan, and then you're also documenting the source for your family member's loan.
Great. Thank you, Jen. That's very helpful. For the sake of time, we're going to wrap up the webinar now. I know there's a couple other questions from some of you. What you can do is you can email me or call me offline, and I can go through all of your questions with you, and we can handle it there. Just to recap once again, you know, my company is Texo Capital. We have a regional center. We have projects right now to invest in under the $500,000 investment amount. We have a long track record of operations, and we also have a track record. The developer on this project has a long track record of using EB5 funds. So feel free to get in touch with us. You can also get in touch with Jen Hermansky as well. And Jen, thank you so much for participating on this call. I know it's late on a Sunday. Appreciate you giving your time.